this computer. All right. So Jaz White, take it away.
You have to talk now.
Are you, did I make?
No, yeah, I'm trying to get it to share the right screen.
All right.
Okay, how's that? See my slides?
No.
It makes me curious, like here we are, a bunch of techies trying to get this to work. Imagine all the non-techies these days who are trying to get meetings to work.
Yeah, we don't see your screen yet, Jaz.
You don't see it?
Nope.
Nope. Ah,
there we go.
There we go. Okay.
What the hook?
Exactly. So I came up with this talk because hooks are something that when I was getting into WordPress, I really didn't understand. It was kind of something I heard, action, filter. I didn't really get it, but it would show up in like a lot of snippets for kind of like beginner learning things, trying to add some functionality to a site. And I knew I would like copy and paste this stuff in, and it like did some magic. A couple of years ago, I had to build out a documentation website for my company for our products, and I ended up using WordPress to do that, which is when I became intimately familiar with hooks, both actions and filters, because I had to use a lot of different plugins and custom functionality to get some things working on the site, particularly making sure that we had very robust search that could search across our products, and also restricting visibility to certain documents. If a customer only paid for one product, we didn't want our other products to show up when they were on the site. So yeah, actions and filters. Took me a long time to kind of figure out what was going on and what's an action and what's a filter, especially because they both look really similar in the code. You'll see these snippets a lot where it's like add action, and then you see some action hook, and then you see some function name, and then you see the same thing for a filter. And then when you dig even a little bit deeper, you start to realize that the names actually make a lot of sense. An action is going to do something, perform an action, and a filter is going to change a value or filter a value so that you can customize something. Could be any type of value. And then where hook comes in is that WordPress gives us these hooks to hook into a particular part of the code. So if you want something to happen when a page loads, there are going to be different hooks into that part of the code that WordPress core is going to have available, or even plugins, but we'll get a little bit into that later. Once again, when you're getting into actions and filters and you're looking at the documentation, you're like, these look exactly the same. What's going on? But that's why I think they're useful to talk about together, because when you look at two things that are very similar and like learn to discriminate between them, it's gonna like help you in the future. So just talking about how to add an action. So I mentioned that there are these hooks in the code, and those hooks are gonna have names, whether they're actions or filters. So when you say add action, you're saying, this is the hook, or they call it the tag in the documentation. This is right from the WordPress website, and I have links at the end. The tag is going to be the name of the hook. So you're going to find the name of where you want to hook in and put that in. The second parameter or argument that is in the function call is going to be the function that you want to add. So a lot of times when you see add action, like I had here, you'll just see it called with these two arguments passed to it. So it's where you want to hook into the code and then what you want to do when you hook into it. Similarly for a filter, where in the code you want to hook in and take a value to change, and then your function that is going to change the value. The next two items here that you're not always going to see used, because they don't always have to be. The first is the priority, and that's going to be designate an order when these hooks are called. So you could have your theme or a plugin both using the same hook to make sure that something happens. For instance, let's see, when you log in, you could have a function because you want to count how many times a user has logged in. But another plugin might also want to do something when a user logs in. So they'll have their own function that they are adding, their own action that they are adding. So that's where the priority comes in. The default priority, it's a I think it's like a 1 to 10 scale. I think you can use any integer, but 10 is the default. So 1 is the highest priority. It's going to go first. 10 is going to go last. If you don't really care too much about the order, you don't have to worry about it. I think one place that I find myself using priority more often is going to be when I'm filtering. So like I mentioned, you're going to get a value and then do something to it, maybe change it, return the value that you want to replace it. So that's where order can be very important, because if you have something else that is also going to change a value, you may want to make sure that it happens before or after, depending what kind of changes you're making. So here's two examples. WP login is an action that you can hook into. I just gave the example of counting user logins. I think that's actually a pretty common one if you have some type of special membership or page security plugin that is going to keep track of user logins. That's something that you could do. Another commonly used filter hook is called the content, which is going to hook in when WordPress is getting the content of a post. So when it's returning that content, you can say, hey, like, I have a post that has everything, you know, with normal punctuation, but I want to make it crazy and replace all the punctuation with semicolons. Don't know why you would want to do that, but that's something you could do because you have a hook that before the content displays on the page, you have the opportunity to change it. Yeah, here's an example of the priority order that I was talking about. This might be a good example where the first thing that you want to do when someone logs in is count how many times they've logged in, or increment the count that you have saved of how many times they have logged in. And then maybe the last thing you want to do, you set it at an 11 because it really doesn't matter when it happens, is you have a custom function that's going to send a Slack message to someone that says like, hey, a user logged in. So that's a good example of like when priority may or may not matter. Similarly with the content, because you're filtering, because you're changing a value, you could do something where the first thing you want to do is just replace the punctuation, and then after that, with the new value from the punctuation change, you want to replace some words. Like maybe you have a special token or shorthand for like a company name or something. a special string that will only be used in a certain context, you can use a filter to replace that type of kind of variable with a new string. Or even I could see sometimes when someone goes to a page, if you had like a special string that you wanted to kind of like randomize a message on a page or in a post, that's something you could change with a filter. I have mentioned that an action is doing something and a filter is changing something. And I think one important thing to kind of call out about this is that a filter is always going to have at least one argument, and that's the value that you are getting the chance to change. Oh, excuse me. So back here when I was showing kind of like what the definition of this add action and add filter functions are, there's this last argument called accepted args. So that's going to be the arguments that are passed to your callable function to add. The default is going to be 1, and filter is always going to have one thing, because at least one thing, because that's the one thing that you're going to have the opportunity to change. But you can also choose to have other things. Some actions or some filters are going to choose to pass other arguments that people can use. For instance, the WP login action can actually be called the full way, which is with this priority of 10 that I'm designating, I'm just okay with the default. And then 2, because actually when it's hooked in the content, it's gonna pass me those 2 arguments, the username of the user who logged in and the user object. And that's how I'm able, in that example of counting the user logins, to look up the user and then increment their login counts. All of this documentation, these ones that I'm showing, WP login and the content, like I said, are available. I think the WordPress.org developer site reference is really, really cool. They have very good documentation, I think, about what each action and filter like has available to you, so that you can kind of figure out how to get the data you want, or if it's the right data that you need. So when you're starting to like look into these and use these aren't just like some magic arguments that just like pop up. These are in the documentation, and you can get more information about what they are. Similarly, the content, this is a more simple one, just passing the content here. And so the arguments that it's passing are 1. One example, one tricky thing that you can run into, I think a good rule of thumb is, hey, I need to do some customization for my site. I need to do something when something happens, that's an action. Or, you know, I need to change this value before a user sees it, that's a filter. But it does get a little tricky sometimes. So I just wanted to call this one out, because this is one that I have, you know, personally kind of dealt with, and that's a filter called show admin bar. It sounds like an action because it is show admin bar, but in reality, when a page is loading, this is going to pass you a Boolean value that you will return. And if you, hold on, return false if page is post. Yeah. So, and then you can decide like, hey, in some cases, I don't want to show the admin bar, even though a user is logged in and they're an admin. So if you return false, then it will not show that. But if you are worried, like I was, about not understanding, hey, when is something an action and when is it a filter? That is something that is very easy to find out on the website. You can search for instance for show admin bar, click the hook so that you get the right set of functions, and then it will show you a filter hook or an action hook. There are lots of resources. You can go like deep in, depending how customized you need to get with something. Like, I need this thing to happen at a particular time. A lot of people have like dug into the WordPress core code to find out the order of every action and hook, or sorry, every action and filter that happen on a page load so that you can figure out when's the right time. I think that's really important when the order of operations matter, that sometimes it's not just about that priority order, because that priority order, when you're adding an action or a hook, only counts for actions or filters. I keep saying action and hook, and I'm really sorry. I mean to be saying action and filter. So I hope that that's clear. Action and filter. Okay, so that priority order only matters for all the filters that have been added to the content. So if there are 10 for the content and they all have a priority of 10, they're all gonna fire kind of at random. I don't know. I don't think like you can guarantee the order for things that have the same priority, but if you had 10 filters and they were numbered 1 to 10, that's how you guarantee. But like I was saying about kind of making sure things fire at the same time, sometimes you need to make sure that you have the hook that happens after another hook already happened, or you might not be getting the value that you think you did. If we're talking not about WordPress core, and these are going to be filters that you get from plugins or themes, I think a lot of plugins and themes will have their own custom hooks that you can use. I would say that they should have that information documented for you and available in some way. And if they don't, you might want to reconsider it, because I mean, depending what you need to do, I think it's just important to make sure that you don't waste your own time trying to find out a lot of information for a plugin or a theme that's not going to provide you with the resources you need. If you're not someone who's like comfortable or like even has the time to like crawl through a plugin and themes code to see how things are working, you need it to be well documented, at least with things like the arguments that are passed to the hook. And when it occurs. So that's where we get into custom hooks. And actually, this is where we get a little bit more into talking about, I said a hook is a place in the code where you can do something. Well, this is what it actually looks like in the code when someone establishes a hook. And that's do action and apply filters. And this is another thing that really confused me when I got started, because I saw add action, I saw add filter, and then I saw do action, I saw apply filters, and I really didn't know what they meant for a long time, or like what was the difference between apply filters and add filter. So I'll tell you that do action and apply filters are something that you put into place so that someone else, maybe you in the future, maybe your coworker, maybe someone that you work with, can add an action, add a function to happen at the hook. So the do action and apply filters are the hooks themselves, and the add action and the add filter are the way that you make use of them and add what you want to do. Once again, these are very similar in how they're defined. So you have that one, it's called the tag again, or the name of the filter or action, the name of the hook. You can name that anything pretty much. If you're using this, or if you're going through like a theme or code, a lot of times you'll see people like prefix things, WP login, you know, it's prefixed with the WP to kind of like avoid namespace issues. So, you know, make sure that you're not using a string like WP login if you're doing something like this in a theme or a plugin. And then apply filters. Once again, this is where it comes in that apply filters always has at least one argument, which is the value being passed in, the value that you're having the chance to change. The great thing about it though is that sometimes you also get additional arguments. So you don't just get the value, you get some more information, some more context around what's happening. So you can decide if you want to change something like based on a permission, if is a user an admin, is a user only an editor, something like that, or what page are you on? Are you on a post? Are you on a custom page type? That's how these actions and filters can be very powerful, because you don't just get a spot in the code to change something or do something, you get the context surrounding what's going on. Oh, so here are some examples of these actually in the WordPress core. This example is like from a while ago, but I doubt this code has changed because it's just, you know, logging in. I don't think they've changed much about it. So this hook, WP login, actually happens in a function called WP sign on. And they put it in by saying do action, naming it whatever they want, in this case, WP login. I had shown that the first argument was the username. So this is the user login that they're passing. And then they're also passing the full user object. Similarly, what's happening here? Okay, so this action, it's doing something. It's just a function that gets run before the WP sign on returns something else. Since a filter is changing content, it's usually going to, it returns a value, it's going to be assigned to a variable. Here, there's a function called the content, which gets the content. And then once it gets the content, puts a hook in place so that you, the developer, have a chance to change the content. And then it does one last thing to like sanitize the content to make sure you didn't do anything like crazy, I guess. And then it echoes back that content. So this is the real code in WordPress core where these hooks are put in place and how they are called. And so you can see that this has 2 args and this has 1. But they could have any number, which is what the ... means. Okay, so one thing one example of custom hooks that I wanted to talk about is how I actually decided to put my own apply filters into a theme that I worked on. I mentioned how I kind of did this documentation website, and for example's sake, I just changed it from our products names to books and magazines. But these were essentially a search that I had in place where I had custom fields that were part of a custom post type. And I wanted to give users the ability to only search one of those things. So this is a search that we're using, and a search takes an input of some kind of search terms, and what it does is return the values that it ultimately shows the user that's going to be in your theme. So in this case, it ended up being a filter. So I had some special permissions in place based on what products my customers had, and I was able to put in apply filters to the results before they were shown on the page. And the reason I did it that way instead of just putting a custom function into my template was really just about keeping my template easy to read, making sure that if I needed to, I could easily swap out the functionality for filtering that in case we made some changes to like which products we allowed people to see. I felt like it gave me a lot of safety. It also gave me the ability to kind of run multiple functions or filters. So first I would kind of like look up permissions, and that was one filter that I applied. And then the second layer of filters that I applied, you know, if they didn't have a certain permission, maybe added like another level. All of this you can do with just call a regular function call. You know, I could have just put something in my template like return values, but I wanted to do it the WordPress way. And I wanted to kind of make sure that I was setting things up for just making it extendable in the future as the site grew. And so that felt like the best way to do it. Another thing with this example, and what I'm actually going to talk about is, besides just filtering the search results for my site, based on what products we had, I wanted to filter what like categories I actually showed to people. And once again, that was tied to permissions. So there is a WordPress function called WP dropdown categories. It's awesome because I feel like it does all the hard UI work of generating like a dropdown for you with categories that WordPress knows you have. You can tell it which categories are going to be selected. And that was a really good opportunity to use of where I could place the filter. So sometimes I wanted to have something selected in that dropdown. I could say, you know, give it a default value. I think 0 is all categories, if I remember correctly. So my default was everything was selected. But then I gave myself the chance, gave myself a hook of terms selected, where I passed in the selected here, and then I could return a new value if I needed to make a change, and then pass it into a function. Building on that, selected was what I had actually selected from the dropdown, but I also wanted to filter, like I mentioned, what I included in the dropdown. So that was another good opportunity to say like, hey, let's give it a default of I won't include anything in the dropdown, but then I can have this filter where I have pick which terms are included. Here, I had only passed in one argument, the selected categories, but down here with included, I decided not just to pass in included, which I had wanted to change, given people the chance to change. I also needed to pass in the taxonomy that it was a part of. I think I mentioned that it was a custom, I used some custom fields and some custom post types. So I needed to actually understand like where, like what these categories belong from. It wasn't just like the WordPress categories. These were some custom things I put in, and the taxonomy let me look them up and get the right IDs and the right metadata about them. So yeah, those are some kind of examples of how I've used them, how to use them. If you're still confused, definitely open to questions. I guess one last thing I kind of wanted to mention that I didn't include in my slides, but came up in my last time I did this talk is like, should you call these things? A lot of people are familiar, like in a theme, putting some functionality into your functions.php. So a lot of times if you're looking at a theme, you'll see a lot of add action, add filter happening in the functions.php. The only bummer about that, sometimes you could have actions that you want to happen no matter what theme you have. For example, like if someone's logging in, maybe like you don't care about the theme, like if you change your theme, you always want that to happen. So that's actually a really good use to have a plugin, which I think seems scarier, but a lot of times a plugin is, I think of it as like a mini PHP file, a mini functions PHP file, that is just always going to run and doesn't matter what your theme is. WordPress has a kind of, I think, secret plugin directory called MU plugins. The MU stands for must use. And it is this great little directory where you can put in some functions like this, some little snippets. That's what I do, and they can't be disabled from the UI. So it's just like protecting yourself, from someone else, from your theme upgrade, because it's always going to be run there. I do think the one thing about that is like make sure that you're like keeping on top of that and not like filling it up too much, because if you don't pay attention to it, maybe you get a lot of cruft in there. But yeah. Any questions I can answer? I do have this resources slide, and I think I have something pulled up here.
And we can share that on our blog, and I'll put that in the Slack.
Just in case you're not aware of the developer site that I was mentioning, here it is, developer.wordpress.org. The reference where you can do searching, or you can just browse. I think this is in alphabetical order, hooks. If you're someone who likes reading documentation and kind of just like figuring out stuff, this can be really fun to look into, and just kind of see what's going on in core. And then actually I just remembered that this was a little plugin that I created, and just to show how simple a plugin can be. This is a plugin that just adds an action during admin scripting queuing. And it's just a custom style sheet that will get loaded if your search engine visibility is toggled off, and it will turn your nav bar red.
She did that for me.
Useful. So useful.
How many people have launched and left that checked?
Oh, don't even.
Yeah. So she wrote that for me, or I don't know. I was the one who probably instigated.
I did it for you. It was also a good way to learn.
Right. I think the other simpler thing, if somebody is really, really new at this, is something as simple as with a plugin. All day long I'm dealing with people who like, well, the plugin redirects people to this page, So I can give them a little snippet that gives them I guess it would be a filter. Is it a filter? No, it's an action because you're changing the behavior. That will turn that off. And so instead of them changing the plugin, which you never really want to do with a plugin you've bought with WordPress core, you can just write it and kind of overrides the behavior that would happen. And it's just like 3 lines of code. It says, oh, disable the CPT redirect, and then just remove it and then it'll be gone. Or like for translating, sometimes the translation file doesn't do 100% what somebody wants. Well, like with our plugin, it's a membership plugin. It always says member. And some people are like, well, we don't want it to say member. We want it to say sponsor, or we want it to say donor. And with a filter, you can filter all the code. And every time member comes up, it changes it to donor. So very simple.
That's a great example.
I had a question. Do child themes have any complication to hooks and filters?
I don't think so. I mean, you should be able to use any of the hooks that are provided if the theme provides any or the core without issue, unless like the parent theme maybe is, I could see a case where like the parent theme has added an action and you need to know the priority of that action to make sure that whatever you're using in your child theme like fires at the right time, but I don't think there should be any other issue.
But it all inherits equally and fine from the parent.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, I guess if you're putting it in, if you're putting it in the parent theme, if you're putting the function in the parent theme.
Well, I would do my coding in the child theme.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And I want to be able to access all the parent functions and stuff. The actions and
Yeah.
filters.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that should be fine.
Which is why I love making plugins, because then it doesn't depend on the themes at all. Or using something like this code snippet. You can just put it in. Code snippet's nice because if you're experimenting, you can turn it on and off if you need to disable it and go back to it.
I had a free theme, but there was one little piece of nicety that I didn't want to pay for. So I didn't want to have to buy the whole thing to change the color of the menu bar. So I created a child and just tweaked it there and it all worked fine.
Exactly. It's mostly the kind of things I still find the whole filter and hooks. Okay, correct me if I'm wrong. This is just a WordPress thing. This isn't I've only used PHP in WordPress, so.
Yeah. Yeah, this is WordPress. And just like a fun fact is that filters and actions like that do action and apply filters at their root are actually the same function. I think it's filters. One of them is actually just an abstraction for the other. So they're really the same.
And then something like Genesis creates its own hooks.
Oh, yeah.
If you're using the framework, it's giving you, that's probably where I first started to understand it, because you had a theme and I was like, well, I want an ad and an extra bar in between the menu and the content. And there's a hook you can hook into, and then I can put whatever I want there. Put this widget between there.
I think I had mentioned search, but I think that's like a pretty common one if people need to kind of go a little bit above and beyond the WordPress search capabilities. Some plugins that do search are going to have their own hooks so that you can kind of interact with the results or even the query before it runs.
So you could exclude things maybe you have a custom post type you don't want search, or a custom post you do want searched, or
yeah, exactly. I've done that, and like I think I mentioned filtering results based on user permission, but I actually ended up doing a little bit of kind of filtering the query that I actually sent to the database based on permission, and filtering the actual results. I had to do both just to kind of handle some edge cases, but you'll usually have the ability to do that.
You would do filtering. Say, WooCommerce has a lot of hooks there that you could do. And say if you want to change around location of things on your checkout page or your cart page, it allows you a lot of hooks that you could go in there and just add little things in there. Like if you want to add another message into your checkout page, or you want to add some kind of a download link on your cart page or something, they allow all these hooks in there and allow you to go in and make those customizations. So you're not having to go and tweak the plugin, which you don't want to do, but you just go and make these small modifications. So that's another example. You know, you mentioned Genesis, which has a lot of hooks. Yeah, WooCommerce is another one of those that has a lot of capabilities like that.
I found, excuse me, this plugin called Simply Show Hooks. It hasn't been updated. It hasn't been tested in the last 3 major, what do you call them, updates. But you turn it on, turn it off. I don't think it does anything except fills up your screen with all the hooks and filters that are active on whatever page you're looking at.
Look at
That's
that.
great. That's great.
Yeah, Genesis has one like that that'll show you all the.
Oh, look at that. And the priority too. That's so nice.
That's nice.
Thanks for putting that up there.
I wonder why it hasn't been updated.
I don't think it does anything. I don't, you know, I mean, it doesn't interact. It doesn't make any changes to anything. It just showing stuff.
Mm-hmm.
It's I guess the importance of this is really what makes WordPress so powerful, is that you can change something. So I mean, I'm amazed with the plugin I work with, all the stuff. I was like, oh yeah, just go into this hook and change that, and I'm like, wow.
Yeah. And actually to show one of these a little bit better, because I got too many developer things bookmarked apparently.
I gotta put that in the chat. The category.
Yeah, see, this is kind of related to what I was talking about, the changing. This is what like the documentation is going to look like when you do need to look for one of these. Going to show you the different parameters, and the first one in a filter is always the one that is like basically the default value, the one that you're going to change, and show you, you know, what type of variable they are. These are just strings, but sometimes you have like an object, so you have some more information. I also really like seeing, this one doesn't really have it, but I feel like a lot of these have examples of how they're used sometimes. And that can be a great way if you're like, I think this is what I need, but I'm not sure. And then you just see a little snippet here that shows how someone else used it. And then you can be like, oh yeah, that's it.
The category.
And the category list. Some of these are very similar in name too, so you have to be careful.
I didn't even know that was there. See, learn something new every day. Did anybody else have any questions for Jaz? You either knew it or you're glazed over. I don't know.
I think it's one of those talks I have to hear like 6 times, and then maybe I'll be ready to try something.
Mm-hmm.
Your site's full of it. If you look
I
at your
know.
custom folders, they're all over there.
I know it. I'm getting closer.
Well, thank you, Jaz, for sharing tonight. And we'll get all those links and put them on our post. And I'm going to stop recording now.